In this video, we'll be talking about Section 2, Chapter 15, Fiscal Policy Options. We'll talk about the different type of economic theories, and we'll expound on them a little bit more. All right, so Chapter 15, Section 2, Fiscal Policy Options. So we're going to look at different types of economic theories first. You were supposed to look at one of these the other day or yesterday with your team. And so some of you will have better insight when it comes to some of these theories versus others. So the first one we have is classical economics. This is the idea that there should be no intervention at all by a government. We have the invisible hand idea from Adam Smith, who we see in this picture here. And these three individuals you see here are kind of the key individuals who helped create classic economics. And the whole idea is that the whole thing can regulate itself. You don't need anyone to participate or help with that. And for the most part, it worked for centuries until we hit the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, the whole classical economics model seemed to fall apart. It still would have been okay, but a lot more devastation would have resulted if there was no action taken by the government. So President Hoover at the time, he was of this mindset of classical economics, and he didn't do anything when the economy was tanking. So he just let things run the way they were, and that's why he did not get reelected. So we found here that during the Great Depression, we had higher employment, farmers lost farms, food prices dramatically dropped. I was looking it up, and some of the prices that you would find for some of the food items were ridiculously low. For a bushel of corn, I don't know how much that is, but a bushel of corn was like 7 cents. Like an apple was 1 cent, and there's real no incentive if your products are selling for so cheap for you to continue to farm. So a lot of farms went out of business during that time. Now, if we stay with this economics, classical economics, it would have returned by itself to equilibrium, but it would take a lot longer, and there would probably have been a lot more people that would have starved, and other programs would have been created. All right, so then we enter into another type of economics known as Keynesian economics. This is the idea where the government steps in and to make sure that the economy continues to grow and we don't have dramatic turns in GDP. So on another picture we'll show in just in a minute here, you actually see we're pretty consistent, and then we hit Great Depression and World War II, and we're all over the place when it comes to our GDP. So Keynesian economics theory is that they will jump in and be able to spend until the economy is doing well and stop spending when they're not doing well. So we have a productive capacity that is there. So jumping in at all times. This is also sometimes known as demand-side economics. This theory was from a book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. So we found that this is what FDR adopted for this. And depending on who you ask, some people say Keynesian economics is awesome. Some people say it's the worst thing you could do to an economy. It kind of depends on your viewpoint on those ones. But the big thing was there wasn't enough incentive for the Great Depression to get us out of that. So Keynesian economics brings us ideas that we'll spend our way out of it. So here's the guy. This is his idea. If you kind of see, I'm going to move just ahead here. If you kind of see in the diagram in this image, you will see when there is consumer spending, business spending, and we have that productive capacity. Productive capacity is a line. I'm going to step away from the video here a second so I can demonstrate this on the board. Okay, so we have productive capacity. This is like full employment. The economy is doing awesome. And each year, between consumer and business spending, you want to hit that. That means you're seeing growth from year to year. But sometimes, if you're in a recession, consumer business spending does not get to productive capacity. We'll call this BC. So Keynesian economics says we will fill in the spending to get us to productive capacity. So then hopefully the next year will be closer and the government can spend less. And then the year after that, consumer and business will be able to get there fully on its own. Yes.
So when you did the political cartoons yesterday, I was researching it for this one. Yeah. So I don't understand why they said like during the Great Depression they should increase spending of the government. Was that just
So the whole idea is that hopefully you'll see recovery. So if you have government spending here and here, hopefully it'll get the economy back on its feet, and then they'll be able to maintain it itself. But the problem is, if you never get back to full capacity, you fall into that problem of where your national debt continues to increase. So that's the problem with Keynesian economics. If you never be able to bring your consumer and business spending back up, you will constantly be digging yourself in a hole. And unfortunately, sometimes with this one, it sometimes rewards programs that really need to go away instead of continue to fund them with government funding. All right, so the purpose of Keynesian economics is to avoid some economic problems. That period of recession, if we are not quite making productive capacity, this would give us the ability to have money that's spent towards it. So during a recession, we'd increase government spending, which would cut taxes, and then FDR used a New Deal approach to get us to full capacity again after the Great Depression. During a time where you have huge economic growth, this is where you see an increase in taxes and reduce its own spending. So the idea is when things are bad, government comes in and spends. When things are good, the government increases taxes to refill that budget in order to save it, in a sense, for a rainy day later. Which, again, it's kind of risky because if you never have your economy booming again, you're kind of stuck with all this national debt. And that's kind of the problem that we fell into with that one. So knowing the difference here, what happens during a period of recession? What happens during a period of inflation? How does the government respond when it comes to Keynesian economics? Those are important pieces to understand. Keynesian economics also believes in the multiplier effect. So the whole idea here is that if we pump in $1 billion into the economy, well, it's just not $1 billion. It will have a multiplier effect, where that billion should be able to duplicate itself, not fully $1 billion each time, but a few times out. So meaning if we, let's say General Motors got a huge bailout from last time when we hit recession. The whole idea here is we give the money to General Motors. They then can stay open, which means then their employees will keep their jobs, which then means if they have security, they'll go out and spend more, invest more, go on more vacations, buy more cars, put their kids through college, all that stuff. So it has a trickle-down effect when the multiplier effect happens. But that's not always the case. They tried this with President Bush at the end of his term and then President Obama at the beginning of his first term. This whole idea of a bailout, and the money was not wisely spent by most people. If you look up, there's, I think, even video clips out there of these presidents saying, yeah, just go out and spend the money that we're giving for this bailout. Well, really what should be done is that should be put in a savings account or pay off debt in order to get things stabilized, but that didn't happen. All right, so we have automatic stabilizers. Again, this is Keynesian economics. During a recession, during inflation, what do? And they use federal taxes and transfer payments. So if you look in this graph, you will see we're kind of all over the place. 1930s, 1940s, beginning 1950s. We go up and down. World War II, we have the Great Depression taking place. Automatic stabilizers kind of help that since that time. The whole idea, again, if we're slowing down, if we're recession, government increases spending. If we're inflation, meaning the economy is taking off, we're going to increase taxes. So federal taxes and transfer payments are the two biggest tools that you'll find in Keynesian economics to be able to increase that GDP or make that GDP grow from year to year and also increase personal income. So this is the second theory that we find with this one. Now we go to supply side economics. This is where the government's only intervention that it uses is taxes. So the whole idea is that if we're heading to recession, we need to cut taxes dramatically, which means there's more money in people's accounts, which results in that they're able to go out and spend more money. So depending on what political side you're on, Keynesian economics is on one, supply side economics is on the other, and they don't necessarily get along when it comes to using the government. Keynesian economics is we can create more programs, get people out of poverty. Supply side is, well, let's cut taxes, allowing the individuals that live in that country to make the decision for themselves what they're going to do with those funds. And then we have the Laffer curve, which is talking about the amount of tax rate in each country. And this is just a visual to get an idea of what are the results that takes place when you have increased tax. Now, obviously, you can't have a functioning economy if you have 0% taxes, but you can't also have one either where you're on high taxes, where you have complete control there. So trying to find that balance between the two, what is the right type that is there? So in the state of Minnesota, they're looking to pass a tax to increase gas prices, and that increase will then help pay for the road system. They can look at this curve to see, okay, if they increase that, what is that going to do to travel, to vacationing, to people going up to Lake Superior? What kind of impact is that going to have? And the flip side is, how much is this really going to impact when it comes to helping the road system? So supply side economics focuses just on the taxes. All right, so throughout fiscal policy in the U.S., World War II, we kick it in with the New Deal with FDR, where we just dramatically increased spending. And depending on who you ask, most would say that the reason we got out of the Great Depression was a result of World War II. Because now we had this massive demand for all our factors of production, our land to be able to create more facilities to build military weapons. So then you have physical labor, which would provide all the physical part of it that's involved in military. Then you have human capital and physical capital that would increase. And then labor. There was a shortage of workers. During that time, the boys, I guess you could say, went off to war. And so now we have a dramatic increase in jobs that were needed in the day-to-day operations. And this is where we actually see an increase in women's employment in the workplace, because while their husbands or brothers or whoever were gone, they were to jump in and start working and keep everyone supplied. We see here that the introduction of more economists involved with the government giving their opinion. JFK jumps in with supply-side economics, cutting taxes. LBJ did the same thing, and then we had the Vietnam War. So we had a massive amount of spending that took place during this period of time. And then we get to the 1980s. Just a side note here, guys, if I'm going too fast, this video will be on Schoology for you, so stick with me here. And then we get to the 1980s. We are coming out of the 1970s. Remember those S&L loans? That collapse in the banking industry. Our president at the time wasn't being taken very serious around the world. We had a lot of crisis that was taking place. You had a lot of inflation as far as prices go. And then we have the introduction of a new president, Ronald Reagan, who brought supply-side economics back into the economy. And as a result, he was anti-Keynesian economics completely. And he was advised by Milton Friedman. Now, if you've never heard the name Milton Friedman, he is kind of, if you look him up, he would be the type of economist that would go into colleges and debate college students about supply-side economics versus Keynesian. And if you're interested in any of that at all, he has so many YouTube videos. He's passed away since that time, obviously, but he just goes in and he's very conservative in what he thought the economy should do versus some very liberal college students, professors. And it's really great dialogue just to listen to these debates that took place. It's not screaming, there's no one criticizing the other. It's giving factuals to both sides of the argument to allow a good conversation, which unfortunately I think we lack at this point in time. We should have more conversations like this where you have both sides be able to have a disagreement and talk about it. During the time that he was in there, 25% tax cut over a 3-year period, and the economy was taking off. We had a huge boom during that time. He is considered probably top 5 presidents just because he was able to turn around the economy. The one thing I guess you could say that criticism that goes against that era was the amount of spending that he did. We did see an increase in economic debt, which is a serious problem too. But he was able to increase the economy during that time. You don't want to write this down, but these are just some interesting facts that we find during Reaganomics, I guess they could call it. Tons of jobs were created. Inflation was from 13.5 down to 4%. Unemployment went to 5.5. This is kind of interesting. The net worth of a family went from 20 to 50,000 annually, grew by 27%. So over that period of time, if you divide that, that's amazing. Real GNP, which is taking just American companies across the world, seeing growth there. And then interest rates. Prime interest rates were slashed, being able to grow the economy as well. So it's a very interesting time period. The time period we're living in as of today, this is what they're trying to mimic. Some things they've been very successful on, but we continue to have a spending problem as we did during that time. That is the end of Chapter 15, Section 2 notes.